then off to Mark. Mark is the keynote speaker today. Mark, most people here probably know you by now, but can you give a little brief bio on who you are?
Yeah, my name is Mark Rosenthal. I've been doing continuous improvement since probably late 80s. We're learning about it, I should say. I am an early adopter of the Toyota Kata principles. As soon as I read the book, I said, okay, this changes everything. It didn't. It just told me what I had been doing for the previous 20 years, and I understood it a lot better. Yeah, so I met the Casas the day of the Nisqually earthquake, because I remember that very specifically. The first time I met Jeff and company, toured them through my Genie plant, and anyway, been a long relationship, which I'm very happy to have revitalized in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into Mark's teaching about kind of more of the mechanics behind Kata and the steps of Kata, I just wanted Jeff to kind of explain what attracted us to Kata. This is a new adoption that we've been using over the last 2 years or so, imperfectly, but making progress. So Jeff, if you give us some backstory to how this all began and why should these lovely people care about Kata?
I'm not sure why they should care, but I'll be happy to tell you a little bit of our story. I think there's a real high level. Many of you have toured us, so you kind of know that we've been trying to figure out how to remove waste and improve for quite a long time. And we had passed through so many hallways with this statement, hey, do you guys know Mark Rosenthal? And so really for the last 20 years of my life, everywhere we go, even when we go to Holland, they'll be, hey, do you know that Mark guy? And like, yeah, we kind of know him. So there was a moment that he came out and visited us 2 or 3 years ago. And it was just like, oh my gosh, we've been doing some things, you know, kind of okay, kind of not okay. But we do have a system for improvement. We call it Kaizen, and it's really a mini A3. And that system has been really a blessing to us in finding and working through and learning how to do problem solving skills with the area around you in mind. Super good at point improvements or if something's bugging you. But what I did not have the ability to do was to say, hey, can we work on something together as an organization? So Mark came in and did some free training for us and invited some of our friends from Nordstrom and other companies. And I literally just saw that. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a way for us to actually go after something together, and it fits our beliefs, knowing and showing the truth, which is, you know, what is the current state? We say truth bit pull, so moving in little tiny bits, so I don't have to feel pressure of knowing everything in the future, but I can just take it a step at a time. And then the pull of some challenge that would unite our efforts at a company or even a multi-company level. So it really fit my understanding of being able to do something in community. And especially as I get to the point where I can say I'm old now, which is evidently a good thing. My wife likes old people, so I guess that's a good news for me. But I'm really thinking about the legacy we leave behind, and this ability for a group of people, and even some of you who've been doing this with us, Lisa, to be able to leave behind something better and have a habit that can hopefully be shared with other people, super attractive to us, because we really are trying to become a company that's all about growing people for a living. So yeah, that's the background. I'm not saying you should use it, but most companies don't have anything better. So, and what Mark didn't tell you is he edited the study guide. So not only did he read the book, he is respected enough by the author to actually speak into, the practice guide. Yeah. So we really feel blessed to be able to have Mark come in and actually, you know, really speak to the core truth of what this is. So hopefully that's enough information. And you always know, if you want more information, just ask. Just pull. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. That's really great. All right, Mark, take it away.
Okay. So Tucker, we're going to be showing and basically dissecting, I don't use a better word. The Costa folks have shared with me a video that they captured of a coaching cycle, an actual live coaching cycle on an industrial process. So can you introduce the
Yeah,
characters in this video?
for sure. I'd love to. Yeah. So in this video, we have Amgad, who is one of our production leads. He oversees our sewing and upholstery team. However, he's helping out one of our other teams, our foam cutting team, help kind of create one piece flow in their work environment, and go a little bit more from batch producing and move more towards bit. And that's the backstory on the kata with him. And then the coach is Darren. Darren is our production manager. Many of you have probably met Darren before. And so those are the characters, and they're working through the challenges with using automation with one piece flow and getting those to sync up. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. So I'm calling this the anatomy of a coaching cycle. And so I would like to do is start out with this one is virtual, but I want to show this is what this is a live learner's storyboard back in the days before there was viruses hanging around. And this one actually I took this picture in a hospital as a surgery team was getting, what they wanted to do was, honestly, what they wanted to do was they needed to have their first surgeries of every day start on time, because if one doesn't start on time, that cascades through the whole day and makes things later and later. So the point is that this storyboard is where the learner keeps track of progress, where the coach keeps track of progress. And what you'll see in the video is a virtual version of fundamentally the same information. And this is what provides a focal point and a structure for the coaching conversation, because the questions you're going to hear really just march across the boxes and the forms on this board. So providing structure to the conversation makes it much easier for people to adopt it, because they don't have to guess about what question is going to get asked next, and they can be more prepared. Structure is really the thing that is underneath the Toyota management system. They have structure for pretty much everything. Other companies, whenever you have companies with a lot of empowerment, there's also a lot of structure within which that empowerment works. And so that's just kind of one of the paradoxes of my friend Rich Sheridan calls that granting freedom through tyranny. By having a rigid structure, people are free to operate within it. So we're going to start off with the first thing you're going to hear this is the model of the improvement kata. And so what we establish is what's our challenge, because the vision here is truth bit pull. That's perfection. We have a challenge, which is something that's typically some month out. The book says 12 to 36. We grasp the current condition, and then we set a target condition, and then we work on things that are blocking us from getting from the current condition to the target condition. So the challenge is, what breakthrough are you trying to achieve? Now, the actual coaching kata questions start with asking about the target, but many coaches, including this one, start with question 0. So that's why I'm bringing this up. What is the challenge? So let's talk a little bit about the challenge and how important that is, because really the question is, if you don't have some structure, okay, what is most important for us to work on? What do people do? Well, they just find stuff, and it may or may not contribute. And then we've all been in this, I've been in a situation where I worked really hard on something and it was, yeah, that's really cool, but it doesn't actually matter. That's not respectful of people, nor is it respectful to make everything a priority and then question their decision about what they didn't get done. Because if you make everything a priority, you're delegating that decision to them and you cannot challenge it at that point. So it's also a leadership thing. So typically what we want is a challenge. It's a business imperative that sets a direction. And we want it expressed in operational terms, not financial terms. And the reason for that is it has to have meaning to the people who are making the improvements and actually doing the work. Now, one of the great ways to establish this, the classic value stream tool, every one of those little Kaizen bursts, quote unquote, is a challenge for that particular area. So in this case, the stamping department has to get, their challenge is to get their changeovers down to under 10 minutes. That'd be pretty hard. The welding area has a challenge to get their changeovers eliminated, to get their uptime up, and to get their cycle time to, to under an hour. And if each of those departments hits their challenge, then in this is right out of the book Learning to See, then the overall future state value stream map can be achieved. And that future state that takes the business requirement and defines it in operational terms. So that's the big picture. That's how value stream mapping and Toyota Kata kind of tie together. Okay, so as you're listening, here's some things to be thinking about. Does the learner understand the challenge? If I'm a coach, I want to make sure the learner knows where we're trying to go. If I'm a second coach, I want to make sure the challenge relates to the goal of the organization in some way. And the third is, are there clear criteria that we know? Okay, so you might recognize this guy. That picture was taken literally right after he took his helmet off after being the first man to walk on the moon. So look at that. Look at that. I'm exhausted, but we did it. He knows he met the challenge. Now he's still got to get home. Okay. But, that's what we're after. Do we know crossing the plane of the goal line? Do we know where we're trying to go? So where it goes on the storyboard is we have a focused process that we're working on. We have what today we must achieve that we cannot, and that's the challenge. So I'm going to just let you listen. The audio is pretty bad at the beginning, so I've subtitled it so you can hear it. And let's just listen to the actual coach ask an actual learner.
So what's your focus process?
So focus process 1B is flow.
And what's your challenge?
Have a system in place in a form that supports 1B's flow start to finish that is easily to understand and follow by July 1st.
Okay. So this is interesting because this is, and you'll see that actually this is pretty good as we work our way through it. This is actually pretty challenging. And what Jeff has said is that having one piece flow across the organization he predicts that will cause them to meet their financial goals because he knows that the benefits of one by one flow are going to get him there. Okay, so now we're going to see is the coach is going to go through what we call the 5 questions, or actually about 12, but that's okay. And so that first question is, what is the target condition? So we have this big challenge. Where are we trying to go in a couple of weeks? And as we look at a target condition, okay, so here's our challenge. Here's the current condition. The target condition is an intermediate step. And then we don't know how to get there. And that's important. What we have to do is we have to run experiments to get from the current condition to the target. And so each time we run an experiment, we advance closer. And then when we hit a target, we set another one, and we just keep marching targets up until we hit the challenge. That's the fundamental model. That's where the target condition goes here. So if you think about it, that challenge sets the direction for improvement. That's up here. Now, a lot of people try to say, okay, my goal is I'm going to climb Mount Everest by the end of the year. Yeah, but you're down here. You're at the base camp. You're not just going to go. You got to learn. So maybe the target condition, our first target condition is we want to get to this point, which happens to be the location of Camp 1. So you're not trying to go all the way to the top because you don't know how to get there and it's really big. You're getting to that target is going to be hard enough. And as you go, you're going to have to discover the route to get there. And the process of reaching that target condition is going to give you a lot more information to establish what your next target should be rather than just marching it out blindly. One of my favorite Mike Rother quotes is when we set up a big project plan for the whole thing, we do that at the moment when we know the least about the problems we'll encounter. So what we want to do is we want to take it's like predicting the weather. I know what the weather is going to be on Saturday. I don't know what the weather is going to be in August, on August 21st. I couldn't tell you. Okay, so we put it on the board, we identify obstacles, and what we're looking for is an achieve by date, typically 2 weeks is the default. We're looking for a performance that we want to achieve. And what we're looking for is then the operating pattern, how the process is working and how we can tell it's working that way. What are we going to measure or what are we going to observe? So think of these as the checkpoints as you're listening to the video. Difference between these two, let's say I want to lose 10 pounds. That's great. You weigh too much. That's like telling the Mariners you need to score more runs. Okay, it doesn't help them. I got to change how I play the game. So my process is changing my lifestyle, and this is how I will know that I'm on track to lose that weight. I need a daily output at 375 units. You need to make more stuff. It doesn't. Nobody knows. You know, if I could, I would. If I say that my exit cycle variation, my cadence of output cannot exceed 15%, cannot exceed the takt time, cannot exceed 15% over what I'm planning it to. And if I do that, I'll get my output. Now I know what my process needs to be doing, and I can measure that in real time. These are lagging indicators. These are real time. The one on the left is how long did it take you to drive to Portland? The one on the right is what's your speedometer say? So this is an outcome, and this is how you know if you're close to your desired pattern of work. Okay, so last thing here before we march in, who owns it? So I put this in because I heard a manager say, well, I gave them a target condition. The learner owns it. It's part of the improvement kata. The coach may give the challenge, but the learner sets the target because the coach helps to make sure that it moves in the right direction, to make sure that it's challenging for the learner, and to make sure that it's actually achievable. Okay, so with that, let's listen to very quick little clip.
Okay, and what's your target?
Clearly define standard work for one piece flow of cutting foam on Haas machines.
Okay, so that's pretty simple. He wants to establish one piece flow on the Haas machines. Again, that's actually not bad. So let's just ask ourselves, do we have an achieved by date? Okay, I'd rather have one. Okay. They have an achieved by date for the challenge, but not for the target condition. We're not sure what performance we're getting. I'll usually give you a pass on the first one on that, but they have nailed what the operating pattern is going to look like, and they can tell when they've achieved it. So of these three, that one is the most important. The next most important is a date, because it's like American football. You only get 4 snaps to move 10 yards. You don't get 5th down, 6th down, 7th down. So the next question is, where are we now? Now, there's an entire process that happens before this of grasping that current condition. But what we're really looking for is the current condition up to date? Is it the actual condition now? Does it reflect what we would see if we went down and looked? Does the current condition describe what is happening rather than what is not happening? And that's one of my pet peeves. And actually you'll hear that. Lack of a target is your current condition should not be, I'm not hitting my target. That's a circular discussion. What is actually happening? And can I see as a coach a clear gap between the target condition and the current condition? If I have an apples and apples comparison, okay, here's what he wants it to look like. Here's what it looks like now. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. So let's listen and see where we're at. And I'm moving pretty quickly through this because the really juicy stuff comes a little later.
And then where are you currently at?
Have no clearly defined standard work for one-piece flow at the host machines. Using the scan QR code and dashboard for current status. Using the ring toss as a pulse signal for the host machine and routing. Team not follow one-piece flow at the host machine.
Okay. So what I heard there was a couple of my current condition is I'm not hitting my target. I don't have one-piece flow. So I would have preferred to hear, and actually I think that's in there because I'm seeing in the video pictures of the actual workflow. I see pictures of the layout. I see that he understands what's actually happening. I would love it if he described what was actually happening. Now, there's a case where the coach may already know, but it's good to get the learner to describe it every time because in teaching the coach, the learner has to understand it better. And a lot of revelation comes out at that point. So then what we do is we flip the card over to the other side and we reflect on what did we plan and what actually happened. So the questions you'll hear first, did you plan as your last step? What did you expect? Now, what we're doing is we're implementing a plan, do, check, act cycle. And this reflection process starts here because we've just done an experiment. So we've done plan and do. And so now the coach is asking, what did you plan as your last step? And what did you expect, which really is what did you expect to learn? Then what actually happened, and that would maybe the same or maybe different because really science happens here. Science is the difference between what we expected and what actually happened. Isaac Asimov put it really well. He said, scientific breakthrough doesn't come from eureka, it comes from, huh, that's funny. We discovered nuclear fission that way. What did you learn? And based on what you learned, what problem are you addressing next? What is your next step? And what do you expect to learn from taking that step? And then do the experiment. So really what the coaching cycle does is it goes through these three quadrants of plan, do, check, act. And every time that the learner performs an experiment, then he debriefs the coach and lets him know what he's learned and what his next plan is, and then carries out that next experiment. That is the cycle that Toyota Kata is implementing. Okay, so let's listen to what did he plan and what he expected.
Then what was your last step?
So run an experiment with option number 1 for one-piece flow on host machines.
Okay, what did you expect?
I expect to eliminate the host machine buffer rack, some waiting of the part not ready for wrapping, scan QR code 2 times instead of 4 times, no overproduce, may not help the core sequence for QCD.
Okay, so those are some pretty good predictions about if I run one-piece flow at the host machine, this is what I think is going to happen. So now it gets really interesting because we're going to ask what actually happened and what did you learn?
What happens?
Then what happened?
I did run 3 different parts a few times. Every part has different method to complete it. What I mean, a regular part, one part you have to cut in the machine. After that, go into the bandsaw to cut it, and after that, go to wrapping. And another part that seat band, you have to cut it 2 times.
Right.
Machines, right. So 3 different methods. I try them out.
Okay.
I get feedback from operators, and I did what the experiment with Chris for each method after I
Okay.
Okay, so that's what actually happened. So now here's where it gets really, really cool. It's been a little rote up to this point.
And then what did you learn?
What I learned, so I want to show first that's the three parts I run to it, and that's the flow of the parts from start to finish. So as printing, scanning, cut the blanks with the time, loading the machine, and the red one, the waiting time, and go into the bandsaw, go into wrapping, go into the part mark, and QC, and after that, deliver to QC. That the
So
boot
this
time was
is
15 minutes. And so the boot time, I know we never evaluate the boot time for the stuff, but the boot time was 15 minutes, and this one, the actual 9 minutes, including the waiting time.
Hmm.
I done the lower back and the same thing. And this one is just a regular part, and the waiting time was 1 minute. Boot time 17, the actual 10 minute. The seat band, we had to wait two times in the middle because you have to fill the parts for the dash band. And the boot time was 22 minutes, an actual 21 minutes, even including the wrapping, the waiting time.
So what was the 12, what's the 12 minutes of waiting? Is that while it's cutting?
Yes, correct. So what I learned, so yeah, I attached the parts number with the boot time and actuals, including waiting time. I like to write it down as a chart so you can see the times and how the flow went. So I did eliminate the buffer rack for the Hus machines, and I did eliminate the buffer rack for the wrapping machine. Don't have to use the ring toss for the Hus machine or the buffer or for wrapping buffer. Uh, a lot of emotions because the stations not next to each other, so we have to walk a lot to the bandsaw, to the stations. Operator waiting the machines until the part done. uh, Print one tag per part instead of one tag for five parts. So when we start the experiment, I had to print a tag for each part, so we make sure that the tag travels with the flow all the way to QC. We receive into the system, and now Chris brought this one up and it was a good point. So we have to, we'll receive into the system every part instead of one tag for five parts, and lack of visibility of the flow line. I had a conversation with this part for receiving, and Chris, I asked him how long take to receive the tag, and he said 20 seconds. So I said, if you're having 100 parts or 180, the maximum that would be almost 3 to 4 hours receiving a day. And I said the rest of the time would be QC.
Oh, I see. The receiving's just putting it
Would
in
be,
the computer.
yes, correct. Just receiving the tag to the computer.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
You know, sometimes the tag, the maximum in the tag, we usually do 5. But if we need to do one piece flow, the best thing too, I didn't know if I did not write it down here. I forgot to write it down. And the sequence of the buffer rack for the crew seating, the part you will never, you have to deliver the part on time. And what I mean on time, I mean because there is no buffer, there is nothing, there is no confusing. One part goes before the other. So you gotta load cart by cart till you get it done. That was totally the opposite what I expected.
Cool. Okay. Let me see here.
You learn a lot of that once. That was very cool experiment. I ran it.
Good.
So just to recap, what came out here was he tried to run one by one flow. And that diagram, he was basically trying to walk the piece through the process step by step rather than batching up. And one of his big discoveries was when I go FIFO, I can't confuse what the next one is. There's no choice to make because there's only one there. And that was a revelation, which was really cool. And I love the amount of detail that he was able to show about how his process was working and where the timing is, which is invisible if you're batching. So all this was revealed by the attempt to run one by one flow. So when we talk about obstacles, we're really asking what problems do you think you have to solve? Mike Rother chose the word obstacle very deliberately because in Western business, we tend to think of a problem as something we can no longer ignore, something I have to tell the boss about. And it in the Toyota culture, a problem is any deviation from the standard. So it's a fundamentally different mindset. It is anything that keeps us from running to the way we want to run. And so Mike used the word obstacle in order to make it more clear that we're not talking about problems in the way that Western business clearly discusses them. And then which one are you addressing now? Because we only work on one at a time. So we have is a parking lot that we establish. And this is what this is the same, this is the one from that hospital. And you could see that this is messy. This should get corrected, crossed out, rewritten every time because it reflects what the learner thinks are the current issues. Really, a lot of the learning gets captured here. So what I want is the learner to read all of the obstacles that are in the way. And the reason is that that helps me as a coach to better understand how the learner is thinking about problems. So don't just talk about one. And then the other, oh yeah, okay. So what it makes up a good obstacle is this is what I saw, and this is the impact that what I saw had on my ability to meet the target. So I have a cause and effect. So really it's a little mini problem statement. What do I see? What did I measure? And why is that important against my target condition? Some red flags I'm listening for. If it starts with a verb, it's likely an action item, and this is not a place for action items. Action items are your experiments. If it starts with the word lack of, that means I know this, I have a solution in mind, and I'm not really defining a problem. So what I'll ask is okay, so why is it an issue? Why is lack of standard work an issue? Why is lack of training an issue? What happens because that's a problem for you? And to try to push the learner down to another layer. And complaining about constraints, need more people, need more time, not enough time. Okay, great. We'll go get our time stretcher. You know, unless you're traveling close to the speed of light, you can't get more. So, and then too much walking. So what? You know, what impact is that having on your cycle time, and why is that important to you? So the other key point is, of that list, which one are we addressing now? And you can see on this example, they've got a yellow sticky. And their problem here was that as the nurses are trying to prep these patients for scheduled surgery, when their family wants to see their loved ones, the nurse has to stop working on prepping the patient and go and escort the family member back to see the patient. And that was causing interruption and taking time away. So, but you can see that I made them say, okay, visitors back and forth, why is that a problem? And I made them add more detail here because it takes time away from the nurse, because you're not going to stop the visitors. So why is the visitors a problem? So that was a case of a correction. Okay, so what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching your target condition? Now here we get a little, it's not quite as crisp as it should be, but it's still got to.
Okay, so then if you were attacking if the obstacle is that you don't know how to run one piece flow start to finish on the Haas machine, it looks like you run an experiment with one option. Is the obstacle still keeping you from the target condition?
Yes, still.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So what did we hear there was the coach fed the obstacle to the learner rather than asking the learner. So you have to be careful about that. You don't want to ask questions that have yes or no answers, because I didn't learn anything about what the learner thought were the problems, because he may have discovered brand new ones. Okay, so now the next question is, what is your next step? So there's really three broad categories for experiments. One is I need more information. I'm not going to change anything. I just need to study the process more. And that happens when I set a target condition, and then I'm going to narrow my focus on part of the process. And now I need to understand more detail about what's going on there. This is ideal. I do a hypothesis test. I'm going to change one thing. And I predict that if I make this change, so just this morning, I was coaching a guy who had a problem with robots picking up parts and the pallet come out and get stuck. So he studied the problem and he ran an experiment, which was I'm going to change the adjustment in the conveyor, and I predict that will cause the pallet to come out smoothly, and it did when they tested it. That's a classic case of that sort of thing. Or introducing a change to learn the effect. And this is what's happening here. So I want to talk about that one a little bit. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you need to learn more about what's actually in the way, because we can't even see far enough to know what problems we will actually encounter, and we don't want to make them up. We have to learn. We either have to observe or run some trials. So a very common way to do this is you run an experiment by taking your target process, which in their case is 1-by-1 flow, and trying it. And the obstacles are going to come up really fast. Then you update your parking lot, pick one, and plan your next experiment. So here's what you're seeing is that try running 1-by-1 flow. That's what these experiments really are, because 1-by-1 flow is an obstacle and waste amplifier. Nothing is subtle. The waste was always there, but it's much more obvious when you try to 1-by-1 flow. And that's the reason that we do 1-by-1 flow, is so we can see the obstacles that are in the way of smooth production. So the key point here is that we are not saying, let's see if it'll work, because we know it won't work. What we don't know is why it won't work. So what we're trying to do is to learn what it will take to make it work. So what is your next step and what do you expect? What I want to hear is what the next experiment will be and what the learner expects to learn or what he predicts will happen.
So the next experiment, I would like to run an experiment with the option number 2 for one-piece flow and a Haas machine.
Okay. No,
and
cool.
What I expect to the same thing. Would be eliminating the Haas machines and the buffer rack and wrapping. And I'm sure that stuff will be helping very easy for people to understand, like no more confusion about ring toss or moving parts.
Right.
No waiting time of the part is not ready for wrapping. So will be no waiting part, I'm sure. And the part scan QR code times 2 or 4 times. Would be no overproduce. Would be less motion for sure, because that would be a 2-person flow. And I think that will do the same thing, will be helping the sequence for the crew seating for buffer cards. So the first option was, I was struggling with the waiting time for the machines when you're running one post flow. But for that option, I'm sure that will be killing all the waiting time, because we'll have 2 people and the first person will say, hey, I will help wrapping if needed. And the second person in the flow will be help loading the machines as needed. So
I gotcha. So that's what you expect to happen?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we've had a next step and a prediction, and I'm skipping over the next video of the next question because it's really just setting when we're going to talk next. But I want to look at this question. How quickly can we go and see what we have learned from taking that step? That sentence sounds a little awkward, but it's very deliberately phrased because the coach doesn't know either. It's very easy to say what you have learned, but this is a partnership. We're moving into new territory. And often the coach is as surprised as the learner when there is when we encounter something. So what we saw in this case was as they try one by one flow, it revealed a lot of waiting because the operator is loading a machine and then waiting for it to run. So there's a huge opportunity there to arrange the work such that such that nobody is ever waiting on a machine. And so that is what when I go and visit them, that's what I'm going to be looking for, because this was done a little while ago. So those are the coaching questions, and I'm going to stop my share. And I kind of blew through this fairly quickly because I wanted to leave time for discussion and reflection, and just ask you as a group now, what did you see? What did you hear? And what about this is compelling for you or challenging for you? Don't all speak at once.
Hi, Mark. This is Ethan. I'm with Cascade Medical Hospital out in Leavenworth, Washington, and I've been using Kata for quite some time. I learned it back in my days with the Polyclinic in Seattle, and I think what was resonating with me here was something I used to kind of insert some different questions into the start when I wanted to coach the team to really think about their obstacles. Because I wanted to know if there was already a current standard in place that the team thought should have been creating the target condition.
Yeah.
Explore that if there was that standard, explore, did they understand it? Was it actually being followed in the first place? Because that would maybe reveal some insufficiencies in the standard process itself. But sometimes the answer would be, no, there's not a standard process that we think is supposed to create the target condition. And so then it, kind of landed on, well, that's the big problem. Like we're just missing a standard, which I think goes to, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it sounds like, when you're talking about obstacles, trying to think a little bit more deeply about them versus just, okay, we just need to create standard work. And I guess I'm struggling with like, where do you go from there when that seems to be just the easy low-hanging fruit is, well, we just need to create a standard, but then to think about it a little more deeply, like when you were going through how to list the obstacles, so they're not solutions. What do you think about that?
So the target condition is a standard. It's the standard that we're striving toward right now. And one of the interesting models that we've seen a long time is we have this standard as a wedge holding the process from slipping back, but that's not the way it works at all. The standard is what we're striving toward. And so the standard simply provides a point of comparison between how the work is actually going and how we would want it to go, which is what a target condition and an actual condition are. There is really no difference between the two. If you have stable standard work, let's go to the classic automobile assembly line only because things happen so fast there. That's why it's a good example. There's a work sequence that if everything was going smoothly should take 58 seconds to carry out. If anything gets in the way of doing that work sequence precisely the way it's supposed to go, what's supposed to happen is the team member is supposed to reach up, pull a rope, turn on a light, and the team leader is going to come in and say, hey, what's the problem? What we just discovered was an obstacle that was in the way of performing to the standard. But the only way we can do that is if we know what the standard is. So the standard is a target condition, and that's the way to think about it. And you may be at the point where all you're working on is stability, and that's awesome. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
I was looking for your name and you turned it into a picture.
Oh, yeah.
if I were, coming to a healthcare, a hospital, the classic example where you can get a lot of payback is the rounding for nurses. A typical nurse will have 6 patients on a floor that she covers, unless it's like like on a med surg floor in an ICU. So if you want to round on every patient every hour, and the nurse has 6 patients, you've got to have standard work that has her walking in the door every 10 minutes, which means she really needs to be able, if everything is going smoothly, to do it about every 8, because you want to have a little bit of slack in there because things don't go smoothly. Now, the standard or in issuing challenges. So stability really is the bulk of the work. And if things are going too smoothly, then you're not learning. And that's the other key is there was a saying from Toyota Numi, and no problem is a big problem, because it means you're not seeing the issues. And that's the time to raise the bar on your standard a bit and then challenge people to meet the new standard. But that's the way it works.
So is a standard an aspirational one or is it an achievable one?
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
mean, it's achievable, but when I first established it, I might not know exactly what the problems are, and so I'm going to try running to it. So think of it as the next target condition.
Okay.
If I don't have a standard at all, then my first goal is to ask, okay, we don't know how do we want this process to work, and just work to stabilize on something. And you'll actually, just by working on stability, you'll get double-digit productivity out of that, just to work to stabilize the way things go, just by eliminating the things that disrupt the work. Once you have a degree of stability, then you can start to see additional opportunity. And that's where this case that we looked at, that's where they're going. If they stabilized on 1-by-1 flow, they will see additional opportunity very quickly. You already started to hear it walking because the layout doesn't support 1-by-1 flow. If they want to improve their productivity, they'll have to deal with that.
Yeah, I know many times we set standards so that they can be achieved most of the time. And what I'm hearing is you're saying, no, if a standard is set as more aspirational, then we're not going to achieve it most of the time, but we're going to try to get to it. And then when we do, it's time to look at upping the standard.
So I'm talking about standard work rather than product standards. I want to be really clear here.
Standard work.
And you got to keep in mind that standard work is by the team for the team. It's set by the work team for the benefit of the work team so that they can see what they need to improve. You don't create it at a desk and say, here's standard, because then they don't own it.
Right.
You can maybe have a starting point, but then try to run that way, but you got to be there with them and ready to catch all of the things that are going to fall out so they don't get frustrated.
Right. Yeah.
I've got a whole nother.
So you're I guess working on whether or not the team meets the standard, something that stays within the team.
The setting the standard is the responsibility of the team. And management's expectation is that you have one and you can describe it to me.
Right.
Content, sequence, timing, outcome.
But
what should happen? Yeah.
Right. But as we're asking the team to create a standard, are we asking them to create something that they feel confident that they can meet on a regular basis, or is it something that we want them to achieve, to aspire to?
Both. So by aspire to, I mean, they could be running to it reasonably smoothly within a couple of weeks.
Right, okay,
And then if that doesn't meet the need of the challenge, then we know. So what's the current condition now? The more stable it is, the easier it is to see. And so what's the next standard that we want to strive toward that's going to get us closer to meeting the challenge that we have?
right, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So we probably have time for one more question or reflection from one of you guys before we wrap it up. You want
Hi,
to
Tom.
be bold?
Hi, Mark. Mark, I have one. It
Sure.
was with standard and rounding, the example used. And when we explore it, we find that patient assignments for nurses are based on the patient's acuity.
Mhm.
So as a result, if I look at the pattern of rooms that the nurse has to visit, it's like a spaghetti diagram.
Yeah.
And trying to convince them to have 4 or 5 patients in a row
Yeah.
generates a lot of resistance because they're afraid they're going to get too many patients with high acuity.
Yeah.
I was wondering what your experience is with dealing with that.
Well, I'm just going to ask, is the spaghetti walking? I don't know how big the floor is.
Yes, it's walking, and some are pretty big.
Okay. I mean, is that the obstacle between to hitting the target time?
That's one of them. That's probably the
Okay.
biggest one.
Yeah. And so it's one of the little mantras I use for change agents is what you can, where you can. And, if there are any other issues, then clear those first.
Yeah, get rid of them.
One of the things I had a hospital in the Netherlands do was, and actually had them do it on just on one side of one hallway because I had a U-shaped ward, right? So just take a quarter of the rooms. Okay, supervisor, what I want in their world, the supervisor is not a nurse. There's a head nurse and there's a supervisor.
Okay.
I had the supervisor just watch down that hall for a couple of hours and make a rule that anytime a nurse goes into a room that she doesn't leave until she accomplishes what she went in there to do. And if she needs something, she flags you down and you go get it for her. Write those things down. Now, at the end of the day, review it and fix 2 or 3 of them and try
Now
again.
you know what the disruptions are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that's the kind of thing that you can do. And then at the end of the day, really, I think, Tom, what you might be looking at here I actually assign the right patients to the right rooms to make blocks of rooms with average acuity.
Yeah. That's something we've explored too. That's pretty hard to do. Because our occupancy is really high.
It was just riffing.
Yep. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Awesome.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
If it's okay. Hi, my name's Lily. I'm a manufacturing associate at a Seattle-based startup. And when we were talking about obstacle parking lots, and you said to kind of avoid saying things like we need more people, that is something that we typically do say because we're a startup and we're a small team. Is there any type of advice you have on working through that obstacle without saying that statement?
Sure. Really what need more people means is that there's more work the work to do takes more time than we have. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do we manage the work that we do? And if there's, what it in industry, it's what's the cycle time? How long does it take versus how long have I got? And my cycle times are too long. Might very well be the problem. Now, it's at the end of the day, there's a math you can do that says after I've removed everything I think I can, this is we have 3 people to do a 4-person job here.
Okay.
But then you've got math behind it. It's not just a general complaint.
Okay.
If I can say, yeah.
Oh, does that feed into the PDCA cycles then as well?
Excuse me. So if you look at grasping the current condition, one of the things we do is we do math to calculate how many people we really need to do this job if it were stable. And if the math tells you that if you had stability, the people you have could do it, then you got to work on stability. But if the math tells you even if it were stable, you don't have enough people, then you have to work on reducing the cycle time and maybe facing the truth that this job can't be done with the people we have. But then you've got math behind it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We're at time. Thank you, Mark, for your wonderful presentation. Jeff, if you could share a final reflection, final thoughts from your point of view.
Yeah, what did you learn?
Awesome. Yeah, what did you learn, Jeff?
Well, yeah, what I learned is I feel like Mark just trained me on things, and I feel guilty bringing you all into it. So the one thought that I had is when we think about doing this work, if we just think of Kata by itself, outside the context of creating a servant leader culture of serving one another, without the idea that we want to grow people for a living, it's just another one of those lean tools that are, I would say, are rather meaningless. So the cultural ramifications, when you say the standard work is for the people, by the people, there's an assumption in that the person at the line sees their own personal benefit by becoming better. So there's a whole bunch in the cultural aspects of using a tool that starts with, well, why are we doing it? Is it for love or for money? So, and yet, I would say any questions you have about this, if you don't have the study guide or the handbook, somebody held it up earlier. Honestly, Mark constantly teaches us to just follow that exactly, and every word matters. And what I've come to learn is crap. I'm just going to do what it says. So I keep trying to ad lib a little bit and add my own questions, and I should just copy him. So anyhow, hope to see you again next time. And thanks for joining. Good to see you all. Many good friends on the line.
Thank you.
Awesome. And I put the book link into the chat if you want to grab that before you go. Have a good one. The next event's in 2 weeks, so we'll see you there.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Good to see you.